I've been looking forward to this video. Hey everybody, it is Jason and today is International Transgender Day of Visibility. Now this is of course a very important day for trans people all over the world, but it is also an important day and an important opportunity to be able to actually educate some cis people on such things. So what I've devised is all the sort of experiences and things I've seen where being trans and what it means to be trans has been misconceived in some way, or it's just an outright myth, or what have you. So there's lots of different things here that I want to run through, but in particular this video is for cis people, or people who identify with the same gender they were assigned at birth. I'm going to be fairly snappy about these just to keep the video fairly short, he said reluctantly. But it is important to look into these yourself, especially as for trans people we do feel obligated to have to explain ourselves all the time, and we really shouldn't have to. There are plenty of things that you can just Google in like 5 seconds and get the answer for. So I'll leave a few sources down below to what I've outlined in this video for different points. So let's start with the first myth. Being trans is based around feelings, not science. Okay, first of all, the whole thing about feelings, yeah, I do understand that, okay, to some people feelings is like, oh, you know, you're a snowflake because you do feelings. It's like, okay, well, firstly, you know, emotions are important to people. There's plenty of things politically that are happening at the moment that are caused by people's emotions over facts. But, I mean, the people who tend to say this anyway, where it's like, oh, we don't care about your feelings, it's the sort of Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson crowd, for one thing. But, you know, to put everything to bed here, being trans is very much something that has been scientifically proven. It's not even just about feelings, it's literally about what you objectively see in the mirror. I very much define being trans as you look in the mirror and you see something else from what your mind's eye tells you should be seeing. So being trans is not a new thing, it's been researched for a while, not much funding has gone into researching it, but it is scientifically proven, people. The next point is kind of a double standard more than anything, in that you get a lot of people who are cis and they are offended that they are referred to as being cis or cisgender. I kind of understand to a degree, but at the same time there's this thing where we have to label trans people as trans people because, you know, they're trans, they're not normal, they're trans. So there's very much still this unlevel playing field here going on where we constantly have to label trans people as being trans, but if cis people are labelled as something which they objectively and factually are, then they don't like it. Okay, now this one could really be a video in itself. Trans women in particular, because trans men and non-binary people are just not part of this equation for some reason. Trans women are invading women's spaces, they are rapists and they are violent and yada yada yada, and they want to infiltrate women's bathrooms. I mean, that's another thing, like the way I phrase that is how it is phrased normally when people argue this, and again, the whole trans women versus women, it's... yeah, this is what I'm saying. This really absolutely pisses me off so much that no, this is not what is happening at all. It's much worse for a trans woman in terms of going into a cis woman space, if you will, because of the possibility of getting raped themselves or beaten up. In particular, trans women of colour get by far the most abuse of all. Trans women of colour get murdered on a much higher level than any other type of trans person. It's insane. And these people have the audacity to say that, no, they're the violent ones, they're the nutty ones, they're the ones who are gonna just come in and rape your child. It's disgusting. And when they're not talking about trans women in women's only spaces, the BBC and a lot of other different media channels, like big media channels in the UK, are to blame for this. There is this obsession now, not just with being trans, but with other things as well, where you have to have both sides of the debate. I absolutely hate that term, both sides. It's giving the extreme right this platform to just say whatever the hell they want without consequence. It's like if you had a textbook that talked about the world and being round and yada yada yada, but then there was also another page that talked about how the world is flat. It's the same sort of ridiculousness. There's a point that is going around saying that in terms of the trans debate, which it's not a debate to begin with, frankly, but people are saying that transgender people are stomping out debate. We are basically not allowing cis people to have a debate about us. And why do you think we're doing that? Why do you think we hate it when you talk over us about our existence? The thing is, the far right is obsessed with talking about freedom of speech. And what they say is, oh yeah, if trans people don't let other people debate about them, then that's stopping freedom of speech. Whereas, actually, no, that's not what it means. The people who spread deliberate misinformation are only doing it because they do not want trans people to have equal rights. It's nothing to do with their opinion or they think that it's backed up by this, that and the other. Their motive is to prevent us from getting equal rights. That is literally all it is. About 10, 15 years ago, it was very much the same with gay people, and there was this debate about, oh yeah, should we allow gay people to do this? Should we allow gay people to do that? How about asking the actual people involved? And of course, because to an extent there are different opinions amongst the trans community even, these people will say, oh yes, well I have trans friends who agree with me, therefore, yada yada. And we are not stomping out debate, we are preventing misinformation. It's as simple as that. Oh, this is a good one. So apparently trans people are obsessed with gender. Really? Sure about that? When I came out as trans, I actually started realising very quickly just how much everything was categorised by gender. And I'm thinking, why? Why does that need to be pink? Why do we have to have birthday cards that are done by gender? And some of the things like baby showers that I've seen, we're not obsessed with gender. Oh yes, this lovely gem, and also quite a lot of people say this about LGBT in general. Trans people are always being talked about and they're shoving it in our faces. It's the media who are obsessed with us, not us being obsessed with ourselves. A lot of us just want to live our lives and just be like everybody else. But no, it's utterly depressing. Like every few days in the media this past year, in the newspapers, on the news, whatever, you hear something about trans people. And I'm sick of it. And I'm trans myself. So you think we're shoving it down your throat ourselves? Really? No, we're not. Now again, this is more of a stereotype and one that people tend to think more than articulate. Trans people all look the same. Yeah, no. There is a stereotype that people expect a trans person to look a certain way. And my god, if you ever say to a cis person, oh, sorry, I thought you were trans, they get so mad. As if being trans is not looking as good or as good looking or something as a cis person? What? There are plenty of trans people, for example, who pass. Now, I'm not saying that you must pass if you're trans, but there are so many who do, and who are mistaken for being cis a lot of the time. There are many trans people who don't medically transition at all. There are those who have only just started medically transitioning. There are those who are waiting for hormone replacement therapy. Also, in terms of, say, if you do go down the medical transition route, there are people who choose not to have all the surgeries, or they sometimes get a lower dose of hormones, or they decide to come off hormones after a time. And also, more to the point, when you go through these medical changes, it changes differently in every single person. And leading on from that point, this is one of my favourites, trans people are just reinforcing stereotypes. Actually, you can have plenty of women who are tomboys and blah blah blah. And it's like, please stop talking. I mean, it's funny, because it's like, you still think trans people should look the same though, for one thing. But also, there are plenty of trans women who are very masculine as well as very feminine. There are lots of trans boys, trans men who wear makeup, who have long hair. But then at the same time, you're like, no, not like that. We want to express ourselves in a certain way because gender expression is different from what your gender actually is and what you identify as. It doesn't have to match completely. But the thing that astounds me is that when trans people do express themselves differently from the norm, so you've got, say, very feminine trans men or masculine trans women, then cis people hate this because they say, oh, no, you're not trans enough, you're not behaving in a way you should. But at the same time, they still say that we're enforcing stereotypes when we do fit to their little categories. Now, this next one is the penultimate one, and it's a big one. People can just get hormones or surgeries on a whim. That's still something that people think is what happens. Whereas actually, no, it's really, really not. Even if you have loads of money and can go private for every medical thing that you do, it still takes a while, but the majority of people, of course, don't because they can't afford it. So they go down the NHS route. Not only are the waiting times ridiculously long, there's all these, as I mentioned before, all these hoops you jump through. There are times when people are rejected. So say, for example, you're granted hormones and the GP turns around and says, no, I'm not giving them to you. Or, say for example with me, I wanted to change my passport and the GP refused to write me a letter at the time. Thank God I've changed GPs now. But there's all these things that we have to endure in order to actually get anywhere. Would you get this with anything else? No. The amount of stuff you have to go through just to even start medically transitioning is ridiculous. And as one of my own doctors said, you know, you basically have to prove that you're trans enough just to do it. And then, of course, there's things like the gender recognition certificate, if you want to go down the legal route as well, that's so insanely difficult to even obtain. But people just seem to think that when you're trans, you get a GRC, because people have asked me for one before, and it's like, I haven't got one. You don't get, like, a trans gift pack when you start transitioning. And people constantly say to us, oh, yes, you need more time to think about it. And there's all these rules, like, with the gender recognition certificate, you have to be living in role for at least 2 years. Even to be seen for things like hormone replacement therapy, the general consensus is you've got to be living in role for about a year. If that wasn't there, I would completely understand if more people would not completely come out as trans until they get hormone replacement therapy or surgery or what have you. But you just can't. You've got to be constantly proving to people all the time that you are what you say you are. So no, even getting things privately, you still got to have referrals and appointments with psychiatrists, and then of course you've got to pay for it. Really, the only difference with going private is you have to see less people and you have to pay more money. That's it. Oh, and the waiting times are normally a lot shorter. That's literally all it is. And of course, the most talked about thing and the most controversial trans thing at the moment in the media is the trans pandemic of children. The amount of documentaries that have come out about trans children recently is just unbelievable. Basically, it's this whole thing of children being trans. Oh my god, the shock, the horror. And apparently children are being brainwashed into turning trans, and trans advocates are releasing books about how to cope in school if you're trans, and oh my god! There's a great video on this by Essence of Thought, which I'm going to put up here, which articulates this a lot better than me. But essentially, if you are a child and you are expressing sort of certain traits that may be related to being trans, firstly, you have to be expressing these traits over a very long period of time, at least 6 months. Also, you have to be doing it absolutely consistently and relentlessly before you'll even be seen by a doctor or psychiatrist. And even then, about 77% of kids who go to be assessed by psychiatrists are then concluded, okay, no action needed, they're not actually trans, etc, etc, etc. The problem is that there are people who say, oh, actually I was just a tomboy, but then I grew up and I wasn't a tomboy, and I'm definitely not trans. And I think that if I grew up today in this world that we live in, that I would have made a mistake and gone and had surgeries and taken all these medications and stuff. And it's like, seriously, it's the absolute paranoia that children are being forced into doing something which they shouldn't be doing. And again, it's a big argument where it's like, oh, children shouldn't need to worry about whether they're trans, they can't possibly think that they're trans. It's like, okay, so do you accept that they are cis if they say they are, in terms of if they were assigned male at birth and they come up to you and say, I'm a boy? Do you go, oh, you can't possibly be thinking in such a way? It's actually, there's that Monty Python clip in Meaning of Life that's very, very relevant, where the mother who's just given birth has said, oh, is it a boy or a girl? And the nurse says, isn't it a bit early to be determining such things? Of course, there are people who express themselves differently as children, but then they grow up, they mature, and they find that actually they prefer expressing themselves in other ways. There are even cis people who I know directly who change how they express themselves, how they behave, depending on who they are with, if they have a partner, or if something happens in their life, or they just change over time. It's not inherently just to do with trans people. At the same time, we should be allowing trans children the opportunity to actually talk to somebody about how they feel. We should be able to accept them in schools. We should be actually teaching people that this is a real thing, and that you don't suddenly decide to be trans when you are an adult. If I had the information available to me that's available now, then there would have been many more things I could have done, like go on hormone blockers, possibly had surgery a bit earlier, which would have caused a lot more of an improvement in my life. But unfortunately, that was not the case. So on this day of Transgender Day of Visibility, do your research, go and actually invest some time into us, and then hopefully we can actually make the world a better place for trans people. But in the meantime, if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to click like and subscribe and give me some comments. Tell me about how you feel about these points, anything you want to say about them. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.